Today's the day, the time's the time, it's time to talk about RWBY again.
Boy, do I love kicking penis.
So, is the purple haro thing passé now, or?
Hey, whoa, Kaiser! No spoiler questions!
Imitating a dead company ain't a good look, man.
It's fine. Miles left years ago. But hey, speaking of dead shite, I heard you were trying to tear RWBY a new one. Mind if I make this a jumping?
Yeah, may as well. It's not like Lone will let us talk shit about RWBY on the podcast anyway.
True, he doesn't like it when we're misogynists. I bet he wouldn't mind us being misandrous though, but that's never gonna be mainstream. Unlike misogyny, misandry's practiced by women.
Okay, Elliot Roger, quit self-sabotaging yourself. We got a video to make.
Alright, fine. I'll suppress my inner aim again and stop taking your gerb. Anyways, which aspect of RWBY are we gonna break down this time? Ironwood's somehow horribly done descent into madness? Why Volume 9 sucks, actually? Are we gonna tell the world why Oobleck's the best character?
I think old Twatter has the answer for us. What is Volume 8 RWBY's plan? How is it bad? And should the writers feel bad?
At least it's not her plan from Volume 7. I don't think I'm ready to get back into that war zone.
So, for context, a few months ago, CBF and I got into a whole kerfuffle debating people about RWBY's plan at the end of Volume 8. Honestly, it's one of the topics that was debated the most in that volume, and for good reason, of course. But instead of showing a long-ass thread you're not gonna read, how about a video barely anyone will watch? We'll lay all the facts on the table, and y'all can be the judge.
So the question that is most important to any RWBY plan is this. What are the goals? What is Team RWBY and Co. trying to do? The first goal is to incapacitate Ironwood and make him unable to command his forces, which would interfere with the final step, which we'll get to. The second goal is to use the Staff of Creation to give Penny a human body, thus ridding her of the virus. This is beneficial for many reasons, but above all else, this ensures Penny, as the Winter Maiden, will be on their side and will not suffer from a Windows update. Utilizing the staff brings out Ambrosius, a sort of architect deity thingy who can make whatever you ask, with some asterisks we'll get to. Then we have the final part of their plan. Use the Staff of Creation to make portals for all Atlas and Mantle citizens to cross into Vacuo. Now before we get into the bungling bullshit, there are merits to that last part of the plan. Salem is currently incapacitated, and the villains seem scattered. However, Ironwood plans to blow up Mantle and use the staff to abandon it. By taking away the citizens from the board, they not only carry them to safety, but also fast travel them to the next location on Salem's hit list before they recover. Ideally, this would mean that the characters still would have access to the staff for future use, and with Penny alive, they'd be a powerful asset to their fighting force.
However, as you can see, this plan has more holes in it than a slice of Swiss cheese getting the 50-cent treatment. Instead of running away from Salem while she is at her absolute weakest, why not use the staff to seal her in her pocket dimension? There's literally negative 13 reasons why this plan wouldn't work. If Salem is completely gone, then Ironwood would have no reason to blow up Mantle, the civilians would be safe, and all that would be left to take care of is the remaining Grimm and Cinder's crew. Hell, given what we know about the Ever After from Volume 9, Salem will either get back to Remnant eons after humanity gets their shit together, or Salem will just drink the tea and we lose our main villain. The only downside is Cinder would probably know about this plan after she uses the Relic of Knowledge. But assuming the main characters would have double-digit IQs in this scenario, whatever intervention she would make will probably not matter. In fact, if they bring up this plan to Jake Steelbark, he would have no reason to refuse this measure aside from distrusting the heroes, which, yeah, I can't blame him there. The mechanics of the portals in the Ever After are of course things the characters don't know about, and as such, would likely require Ambrosius to give a heads up. But even then, this plan will not only ensure the civilian survival, especially if they still plan to backstab Jake anyway, but also take care of the main villain everyone has been losing their minds over. The fact that this wasn't the first option considered baffles me, especially when Ozpin, with all his eons of experience, is back on the table and had a lot of time to consider his options. Then again, this is also the same douchebag that decided to put Atlas into the sky instead of using his staff to seal his crazy ex. All of these dipshits have the imagination of a tech bro trying to make transit plans. But hey, this is us just taking a step back from this whole thing, rather than being tunnel visioned into moving the civvies from point A to point B. And if you think that is the most debatable part of this plan, you haven't seen nothing yet, people.
Let's start with the team forgetting halfway through that Ambrosius is a bit of a monkey's paw kind of guy. In slightly less than half an hour, they were informed by Ozpin that the vaguer you are with your ideas, the more creative liberties Ambrosius takes. So you have to be specific as possible about what you want and how you want it, so you don't end up with an outcome you don't like, with drawbacks you didn't account for. You know the old adage, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. These guys were very specific with the penny stuff, but unfortunately, not so much with the portals. With the stakes being so high and knowing how picky Ambrosius is, they asked for a one-way trip to Vacuo, with every portal converging into one specific super portal to get there. This led to a few critical issues and incidents. In not referencing any kind of security or identification measure to reject certain people from getting into the portals, they left the door wide open for any bad guys to sneak their way in and fuck shit up. Like Cinder. Yes, she outplayed them via the Relic of Knowledge anyway, but the heroes made it a lot easier since all she had to do was waltz on in, and no extra steps were required. They also weren't specific about where in Vacuo, meaning once the bulk of our heroes and civvies made it in, they found themselves stranded in the middle of a sandstorm in the desert, with no way back from the one portal everyone was funneled through. They stranded everyone in the middle of nowhere, God knows how far away from the actual city they were aiming for, and let the bad guys terrorize the Atlesian and Mantle citizens and take the relics from the heroes, among other things. They never thought about making a portal to a safer location for civilians, and another portal for the heroes to go to the actual Kingdom City in Vacuo.
Oh yeah, Vacuo. Let's actually get to that. Now, I know that a lot of people are really invested in the plan presented in the show, and I am all for respecting different opinions.
I'm not.
Ignore that. But whether they are more informed opinions is a different story. So, with that being said, sending everyone to Vacuo is the worst idea outside of going straight to Salem's hellhole. Let's count the ways. 1. Vacuo has been stated numerous times to be probably the most barely hospitable place on Remnant. It is a desert wasteland, which is not very good for citizens born and raised in negative temperatures. Its own huntsmen have been characterized as eccentric but shady mercenaries rather than peacekeepers, and it has some of the most dangerous grim on the entire planet, something that will be exacerbated once you send millions of grief-stricken people.
2. Assuming they even survive the grim attack or heat stroke, Atlas apparently has a bad relationship with Vacuo, by the story's admission. This information should be public knowledge, assuming anyone in the cast has ever picked up a history book or watched the local news. Vacuo is also not exactly the most ample resource on Remnant, so taking in these refugees will only make public relations go from bad to civil war within the first month. Not to mention, these conditions mean that Vacuo would result in by far the most negativity out of any possible kingdom they could have been sent to, resulting in a much larger grim horde to fend off than anywhere else would have. Even if they can consistently deal with that from a firepower standpoint, it's both part and the result of a perfect perpetuating storm of problems feeding into each other.
And number 3, this is Salem's next target. Nuff said. To summarize, either the starvation kills them in 3 months, the grim kills them in 2 months, the heat stroke kills them in 1 month, the riot kills them in a week, or Salem slaughters them in a day. Now, there are some counter arguments people have in favor of Vacuo, and we're gonna break those down right now.
1. There are huntsmen in Vacuo, both licensed and burgeoning. The minute our heroes and civvies are able to contact Vacuo, they should be able to send out some guys to help make the journey easier. Once everyone is is inside, the sheer manpower alone would be enough to handle the grim onslaughts resulting from all the negativity. Plus, the original idea was to send them to the city anyway, so if not for Team RWBY dropping the ball on the specifics, they'd all be inside the kingdoms by now. 2. The remaining kingdoms are either out of commission entirely or severely handicapped, so the number of available huntsmen in, say, Vale and Mistral is limited at best. Vale is our best bet regarding numbers and raw firepower.
This dumb bitch motherfucker said Vale was our best bet, it was meant to be Vacuo, what the fuck?
Which ties back to reason number 1.
Unfortunately, neither of these can account for the numerous other negatives we've listed. Realistically speaking, the journey from the desert to the inner city proper will be a massive toll, what with all the grim and the inclement weather, which naturally shaves away everyone's aura, at least for those who've unlocked it to begin with. Hell, even in the city, there's still everything else to deal with. Meaning even once they're safely in the kingdom, they're still playing on hard mode compared to the other territories, which may have fewer huntsmen but also far fewer problems for everyone to worry about. Too long didn't watch, one does not stop heat stroke, famine, riots, or Satan with her magic nuke with a bigger army. Period.
Plus, Vacuo may have huntsmen, but we have no reference point for how powerful their military is, if they even have one. If Atlas couldn't survive 2 days against Salem, Vacuo wouldn't last a 9 to 5 shift. Let's review some of the major cities and kingdoms we know of that could have been better than Desert Vacuo: Mistral, Argus, and Vale.
Mistral is the most commonly brought up alternative to Vacuo. After all, despite the deaths of most of the registered huntsmen, it's still a relatively safe and fortified kingdom after the failed efforts of Salem's crew and the White Fang in Volume 5. It's been months since then, so not only would there likely be at least temporary replacement headmaster following the death of Leonardo Lionheart, but the students of Haven Academy should probably have returned by now. Remember, they were never licensed huntsmen, meaning they weren't sent on suicide missions as far as we're made aware.
The council is still active, as is the police force that worked with Gira Belladonna to arrest Adam's forces. Hell, Gira's forces could still potentially be working with Mistral months after the end of Volume 6. Combined, all 3 forces should be sufficient to withstand a decently powerful Grim invasion that would occur from all the negativity emanating from the civilians transported from their homes amidst the fall of their kingdom. Hell, even if Gira's forces had returned to Menagerie by this point, that still leaves Mistral's police and student huntsmen. The Vale breach in Volume 2 was swiftly dealt with by only a few student teams and a handful of professors. In Volume 6, both the Atlas military forces stationed in Argus and our heroes dealt with the Leviathan and its fellow Grim. Sure, the latter was largely thanks to Ruby's Silver Eyes, but between Cordova and Zemek and everyone else's efforts, it's unlikely that this would have gone the way of the falls of Beacon or Atlas. Volume 2 may be where the bulk of students were at their most overpowered, but there is still enough precedent that Haven students and any professors appointed in the following months would be sufficient deterrents alongside the police and any non-civilian combatants brought over. Remember, Main 4 and Crow aside, the rest of our heroes are still there, including the Winter Maiden. She's also one of the most powerful huntresses out there, and the most powerful person in the Atlas military. Granted, not many students or huntsmen did anything during the fall of Beacon back in Volume 3, and in general, characters had been greatly nerfed that volume, but still, an assault on that scale is much larger than what would likely occur there. There's definitely some confirmed firepower, even before half of the crew from Volume 8 shows up.
The most immediate counterargument you might notice we sidestepped is how Lionheart sent pretty much all of Mistral's licensed huntsmen on suicide missions, as Crow found out in Volume 5. However, everything that has been said up until this point about Mistral should be more than enough to show how that place and the forces RWBY brought over would hold up just fine to the inevitable grim gathering that would ensue, barring a kingdom collapsing event, which this wouldn't cause. Another potential counter-argument is that Mistral's crime rates are higher than most other capital cities, and the seedier folks on the lower levels could see a good reason to take advantage. However, the Mistralian government should be more than capable of addressing that. Haven Academy itself would make for a decent shelter for the number of civilians. While the more neutral climate might be something for the citizens of the cold-ass Atlas and Mantle to get used to, it shouldn't pose any real risk to most refugees compared to the hot-ass, deserty-ass Vacuo. It wouldn't be the smoothest thing in the world to coordinate, but hey, Volume 4 already showed that communications across a given continent still run smoothly enough. So they could call up Argus forces to lend a hand. It wouldn't even take a few days. Actually, speaking of Argus, that's another option that was sometimes brought up. Let's talk about it. A few days away from Mistral via train, at most, Argus honestly should have been the first choice people considered. With its cold climate and Elysian military forces, it would be the most comfortably familiar location for Elysians to put up with. No climate adjustments required, and the same forces they're used to seeing back home stationed there. Cordovan's unit should still be up and running. Not to mention, it's been a couple of months, so both her mech and the poorly designed fence shield surrounding the sea walls of the kingdom would have had enough time to be repaired. They'd arguably be better equipped to deal with a decent invasion like the one that happened in Volume 6, especially with Winter and company there to help, now that Cordovan isn't beefing with anyone at least.
There were two highly specific reasons the Leviathan Grim and its horde attacked Argus in the first place. The first was Cordovan scaring Argus citizens with the mech she used while beefing with Team RWBY. The second was the Relic of Knowledge, whose grim attracting properties range from actually negligible to Niji Sanji's usage of the term negligible. The latter is a non-factor now, and the former, well, everyone knows about the giant mech stationed away now, and if an invasion does occur, they'd probably be happy to see it this time instead of terrified. The military, as well as any Argus huntsmen and the combatants brought over from Atlas and Mantle, should arguably be even more capable of dealing with a grim invasion stemming from the refugees' negativity than Mistral.
One potential flaw in this plan would be that since Argus isn't nearly as big as a capital city, there's a much larger risk of overcrowding, leading to more tenuous resource and shelter management. However, they have military airships and a train that has likely been repaired in the months since Volume 6 if suddenly a bunch of people need to be transported to Mistral or anywhere else on the continent of Sonus that Grimm hasn't torn down yet. We've seen the airships be used during evacuations in Volume 7 and 8. If you put a couple of decent huntsmen on the train that itself has fortification systems and don't turn them off, the train ride should be much less precarious than it was in Volume 6, especially without relic shenanigans.
Dee and Dudley may have been incompetent, but what happened in V6 was clearly a special case. Probably even more so than this would be otherwise. The train would have a lot more huntsmen on it, or not even be a thing for people to use by the time our heroes needed to get to Argus. Add some military protection in the form of airships, while coordinating with Mistral to maybe send some of its forces on airships to help protect the train once it's closer to Mistral than Argus, and there you go.
Another rebuttal, because we don't have enough of those already, could be that many Elysian and folks from Mantle are already pretty burned by what Ironwood and the other higher-ups had been doing and might risk taking it out on Argus' citizens or military. The former is a bit more likely than the latter, seeing as military aid have been helping Elysians evacuate, but even then, maybe Mantle folks might be a bit more bitter regarding that as a result. This conflict is gonna happen no matter which location you pick, but I can see it be a bit more pronounced here. Still, it's unlikely to draw a lot of Grimm or immediately result in any fights or riots against the military or with the locals.
So yeah, we've made the case for two options that would have been better for RWBY to send everyone to than Vacuo. What about the third one? The fringe option. When we were making the rounds over at Twitter.x during some of the most recent arguments about RWBY's plan at the time, Vale was not one of the alternatives brought up. Hell, I only brought it up to Kaiser after we agreed to hash out this script. This is probably even more nebulous than Mistral, but remember how the restoration efforts in early Volume 4 had already made significant progress after several months?
Professor Goodwitch is working round the clock to restore Beacon to its former glory.
By the time everyone got back together in Volume 5, the full duration of the 6 to 8 month Volume 4 time skip had passed. with an extra few weeks during Team Ranger's adventures for good measure. Between the end of Volume 5 and the start of Volume 7, it's been around another week, and then the training lasted for months. Now we're past V9, which, granted, means it's probably only been a handful of days since then, but still, the restoration project has undoubtedly come a long way in the span of close to a year at this point, no matter how much you want to debate any specifics. Hell, Volumes 7 and 8 partly hinged on Amity Tower's restoration being near completion, so that global communications could be brought back for at least a short while.
There are undoubtedly plenty of licensed Vale huntsmen around, as well as Glinda, Port, and Oobleck. The moment the aforementioned crew of Winter and company join the fray, any potential Grimm still around during this point is completely toast.
With that combo, there's still a really solid army to combat any potential Grimm drawn in by the ensuing civilian negativity. The climate shouldn't be too big of an adjustment either, probably only on the level of Mistral, which itself wouldn't be an issue for most people. Vale is another generally well-fortified city with an academy that itself didn't suffer as much damage as Vale CCT Tower or much of the surrounding city. By now at least, it should not only be perfectly or at least largely restored, but classes have definitely started back up there. There's almost certainly a fresh batch of new students, as well as some returnees.
And then here comes Volume 9's epilogue to shit all over that. While Salem sent Tyrion and Mercury to do some damage in Vacuo, she herself decided to invade Vale for some ungodly reason, and not immediately heading to Vacuo. You know.
Because shut up.
Seriously, why did she bother attacking Vale when she couldn't even find the relic? You might say it's to keep the heroes from escaping to any other safe haven, but if you had carpet bombed Vacuo and taken their relic of destruction, that problem wouldn't matter anymore. But moving on from that,
one possible issue would be the Vale residents' resentment towards Atlas, seeing as their state-of-the-art military technology was compromised on the day of the fall. There would definitely need to be some delegation to quell these sentiments and any conflicts that could result from it, as Ren alone can only do so much in this respect. This is unlikely to draw a lot of Grimm, however, especially prior to Salem showing up, since, again, that happened a few days later.
Also, for anyone that still requires further convincing regarding whether these other options would be worthwhile alternatives, we got two bombs for you to pay attention to.
Ren's semblance is potent enough that he can mask the negativity of 100 plus people at a time. Sure, with the train incident in V6, he needed John's help, but that wasn't to amplify his semblance's effects. It was to sustain his aura long enough to manage this for a prolonged period of time. Reasonably speaking, he should be able to do this periodically for a minute or few at a time, especially now that his semblance has evolved and he's had several more months of training. He'd certainly have a much easier time sustaining this in Mistral, Argus, or Vale, where the weather isn't nearly as inclement as the Vacuo desert they're in now.
It's like we said earlier, harsh climates slowly drain aura, like in the frozen outskirts of Mantle in Volume 8. The other kingdoms, as well as the city of Argus, don't regularly have either blizzards or sandstorms like a desert or tundra do. In better environments such as these, Ren should have no trouble mitigating everyone's negativity, limiting the possibility of attracting loads of Grimm. He'd simply have longer cooldown periods to deal with the inevitable exhaustion, and even then, aura regeneration would be more feasible in these less dangerous climates than Vacuo.
The other thing is that despite how bad of a plan this was, and how poorly it worked out, they managed surprisingly fine. In the second Justice League crossover movie,
which may or may not be canon, Viz Media aside,
RWBY soloed an entire batch of Grimm in the desert, while John and the rest of the Atlas refugees are safe in Vacuo. Hell, the unfinished true V9 ending, as well as RWBY Beyond, further reinforced the idea that everyone quickly and painlessly made it to Vacuo. Would have been so much safer for them to handle all of this in Argus or Mistral, the two locations that aren't on Salem's purview right now. But still, this doesn't validate RWBY's plan so much as it reinforces how we could have gotten the same outcome in a much less dire way with very quick alternatives. They picked the most dangerous option and still managed, in spite of every factor that would make Vacuo, especially its deserts, such dangerous prospects to gamble on.
Even longer didn't watch, this should not have worked, especially not as smoothly as it did. It completely undercuts the tension that the Volume 8 finale tried to instill when it stranded them there, since we never got to see a single part of what should have been their tumultuous journey. Hell, even though not a single soldier from the Atlas military showed up during the whole transporting sequence in Volume 8, Team Funky is there, evidenced by Neon showing up. Any debate on why Mistral, Argus, or Vale would be worse options more or less dies right then and there, especially when factored in with everything else we've talked about. Every caveat about how the refugees might get into conflict with the locals of each region for one reason or another is entirely moot as well, given how well Weiss's folks have integrated into Vacuo, including the climate and people, as far as everything post Volume 9 showed off. If Volume 10 ever gets made, it could turn around and say that there was some friction between Vacuo natives and the refugees from Atlas and Mantle, just as it was shown in the epilogue.
Still, that doesn't necessarily mean that most of this would still happen in those other locations, let alone as bad, since, again, Vacuo was always going to be a more volatile location due to the reasons we've beaten into the ground. For now, though, we're left to assume that it didn't happen, and that the integration process went smoothly. The biggest crock of shit this show gave us before getting shelved, temporarily. If the plan worked for Vacuo, there is no good reason why it wouldn't have worked anywhere else. At least until Salem rolled up in Vale, and most of the refugees would have to be re-evacuated. But hey, that still leaves Mistral and Argus.
And make no mistake, people, with a plan this poorly constructed, it's easy to see how we got to this point. The writers needed a way to make sure the plot could move in a hyper-specific way at all costs. That's why Emerald wasn't present in the big fight of the Volume 8 finale involving Cinder and Neo. That's why Ruby sent everyone to Vacuo and they got stranded for a bit. More logical moves would completely undermine what the writers are going for, or at least force them to find a way around that in a limited amount of time. Dare I say, they could have gone creative!
Shut up, bitch!
Making characters arbitrarily or unfathomably stupid for the sake of the plot is Ruby's bread and butter, after all. With a few minor tweaks, Ruby's plan could have actually made sense and taken part of the story in a potentially interesting direction. Then again, they also unceremoniously undid the whole getting stranded in the Vacuo desert thing, so I guess it all keeps tumbling down, huh?
Ruby's plan was bad. It wasn't bad because the writers wanted her to have an understandably flawed methodology in the current situation. It was bad because they needed to advance the plot in a very specific way, and because they wanted to build on the theme of risk and how Ruby's leadership is being put to the test. But they couldn't actually come up with an organic way to get there. The latter has been a major aspect of Volume 7 and 9, but as we highlighted with her V8 plan alone, the execution is about as sloppy as a toppy.
CBF, she's like 17.
Tell that to Eileen when she designed Ruby's Volume 4 outfit. Wait, Ruby was 16 back then, that's even worse.
Well, it's not like these guys were ever forward thinkers. That's the bitch of it, ain't it? Ruby's decision was not a believable mistake due to the sheer number of options available to them. The writers had to give everyone's IQ points to fucking Alderaan treatment so that they could dump the main cast in Totally Not Wonderland. This is fan fiction writing with a budget and it stinks all the same. Nuff said. Thanks as always, people. Another day, another fun video, and we got more on the way. Like, comment, subscribe if you like what you see, want to share your thoughts, and want to see more. And if you're feeling real generous, support me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, y'all can jump onto my Discord server.
With blackjack and hookers!
I know, genius name, came up with it myself. And you can get shoutouts at the end of each new video, if you're into that sort of thing. You want to see some behind the scenes stuff too? Feel free to throw in some more. Stay tuned.